All right. Welcome back. Good evening. We're here for part 2 of the Who Are the People in Your Talmudic Neighborhood series. Thanks again to Beth Am and the Thuman Beit Midrash for having me back. And welcome, Jeff. You get a shout out here, and Bob as well. Good to see you again. So last week we spoke about 2 contrasting personalities. Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, who was a plastered cistern that never lost a drop. We talked about he was the champion of preservation, of keeping things as close to tradition as possible. And then his counterpart was
Elazar.
Elazar ben Arach was the Ma'ayan HaMitkaber, the overflowing spring that constantly gathered force. Eliezer ben Hyrcanus was the plastered cistern that never lost a drop. And so Elazar ben Arach, who was the innovation champion, and so we looked at the interplay between those two. Tonight I actually only have one character for us because I just think he's so fascinating, and he was very influential. So we're going to be learning about Rabban Gamliel, and I would say let's just get right to it. We've got a couple Mishnahs here from chapter 2 of Masechet Brachot. The discussion here in the Mishnah is all about when is the right time to say the Shema. And midway through the chapter here, we've got our first glimpse of Rabban Gamliel that we're going to look at tonight. And I guess you want to just take turns? Does one of you want to read this one here? But we're going to look through it. We're going to read these 4 Mishnayot in succession, number 5, 6, 7, and then 8. And we're going to try and identify how Rabban Gamliel understands his relationship with others. The first thing that I would point out is that we're used to seeing rabbi or rav generally when we talk about teachers, but when you see Rabban with the nun at the end of the name, that means that he's the nasi, the president or the leader of the Beit Midrash. So he's like the chief rabbi or something, as it were. So we'll see how he interacts with the people around him. So who wants to read it first?
A groom is exempt from reciting Shema on the first night of marriage until Saturday night if he has not done the deed, been intimate with his wife. There's a story that Rabban Gamliel recited Shema on the first night that he got married.
All right, so let's just pause right here. What's the halacha that the Mishnah teaches? That on your wedding night, you have other obligations besides saying Shema. Right? So be with your wife.
Well, not only that, you're exempt from saying Shema.
Correct.
It's not only an obligation to be with your wife. It's
right.
If you haven't
above all else.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And so then we have this glitch that says that Rabban Gamliel actually, what did he do?
He recited Shema.
Right. On the first night of his after being married, he actually did say Shema. So his students said to him, "Go ahead, Bob."
Didn't you teach us, our teacher, that a groom is exempt from reciting Shema on the first night? He said to them, "I will not listen to you to remove the kingdom of heaven from me for even 1 hour."
Okay, what an interesting response. What does that mean? I will not listen to you to remove the kingdom of heaven from me for even 1 hour.
In other words, if you don't say the Shema, there is some removal from in the, I don't know if it would be in Shemaim or whatever, but that not saying it is not a good thing.
Okay, absolutely, right? The definition of what's going on as we're saying Shema, that is our declaration of faith. That is our connection with God, saying that we accept the yoke of heaven, as it were, right? By saying Shema, by identifying God as our creator. And Rabban Gamliel says, I understand what I taught you guys, but it's not okay for me, even for 1 hour, to not be connected with HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
So just as an aside, could he theoretically have said Shema and then been with his wife?
Probably, that would make sense. But that the point is that he still switched his priorities the opposite of what the Mishnah taught.
Is there an inference that because he was in the position that he was in as the Rabban?
Beautiful. right? So now you're thinking about maybe he had like a professional responsibility that he had to set a standard or something, right? So let's read the second one and see how far that takes us. Jeff, you want to?
But isn't it necessary to look for a way to be lenient?
What do you mean?
Just in general. Well, in the sense of, so he's the leader, but he's on his wedding night.
Yeah.
So isn't it incumbent upon, like, there's a saying that it's easy to make strict judgments, but it's more difficult to make lenient judgments, and you should strive to make lenient judgments. It takes more study to make lenient judgments.
Sure, and perhaps you could even say that the halacha itself is already a leniency. Right, meaning it doesn't say he can't say Shema on the first night. Right, he's not breaking the halacha. It says he's exempt from saying it, that he's not obligated in doing so. And he says, even though I'm not obligated, I'm still going to hold myself to that standard. So maybe that's sort of he's imposing the stringency as opposed to the law imposing the stringency. Is that?
Yeah, I just wonder why, if it's said that you're supposed to look for leniencies, why he, the Nasi, imposed upon himself the stringency. And that's
great.
It's something to, and his class is watching him. His constituency is watching him.
Sure.
Because you watch the rabbi for cues on
to be the model. Yeah. So you know what? Let's read the 6th Mishnah, because we may get a very different perspective. And this is just, if we were studying the Mishnah, this is the very next one that comes. So I think it's very logical to put them in succession.
Rabban Gamliel washed on the first night after his wife died.
Okay, so pause, time out. What happened here?
Wife died.
Okay, his wife died, and then there's a custom that mourners refrain from washing themselves and
anointing them.
Right, all of the signs of physical pleasure that we want to sort of remove ourselves from. People cover the mirrors so that we're not looking at our poor reflections of unkemptness. The only reason I'm unkempt is just because I have twins at home. But still, right? So Rabban Gamliel washed on the first night after his wife died, and his students are about to have a problem with that. Tell us, Jeff.
His students said to him, "Didn't you teach us, our teacher, that a mourner is forbidden to wash?" He said to them, "I am not like other people. I am an istanis."
Istanis, yeah. And it's hard to define this word istanis. The closest that I could come up with is maybe he's like OCD, or like needs certain pleasures, or like delicate perhaps, or maybe he's a germaphobe. There's some category here that istanis is a person who like couldn't survive without their comforts of whatever type. So what he's telling the people now, right? So Bob, this is the opposite here, right? Now instead of him being stricter than the law,
he's imposing a leniency on himself.
That's right. He's imposing a leniency on himself, and
allowing himself a leniency. Put it there.
There you go. Sure. That's even better of saying it. But what's neat about it is his response has 2 parts. The first part is Eini kisha'ar kol adam, right? I am not like other people. And then the second part is I'm an istanis, right? This is my halachic categorization so that you know that I'm not just changing the rules for me wantonly or willy-nilly, but rather that there is a halachic status of istanis, people who do bathe. I think it's got to be something related to like OCD or germaphobes. That's the closest I can come up with, is like a modern association. But they get certain pleasures or certain pampering that halacha allows them to do, even when for the masses it's not permissible. So, you know what? Let's go through the other 2 also, and then we'll build the picture. Because now we got the first case where Rabban Gamliel says, I understand what everybody's doing, but I'm going to be stricter on myself. Then the second case, I understand what everybody's doing, but I'm going to be lenient on myself. Right? And the reason is because I am different than everybody else. Right? So we got to ask, what does that different mean? So what are possibilities? Maybe you said different class, right? That's one. What else?
Again, he has to be held up to a different. He's looked upon as the teacher, so he has to be different. I mean, he's teaching everyone else. He's setting the example for everyone else.
Okay, so maybe he just has different rules than everybody else because of his position, right?
Maybe the Talmud allows, the law allows for Rahmanas.
In what sense?
He's got this problem. He's an Istanis.
Okay, so he's different because he needs to take advantage of these certain parts in Talmud that most people doesn't even apply to them. Is that
Possible.
okay? Fine.
Well, and we've seen really he's at two extremes. One is I'm going to do something that everybody else doesn't have to do because I'm the Rabban, and at the other end of the extreme, I'm not going to do it because I'm an Eastanis.
Sure.
So he's really he's kind of like at the same time that he's holding himself up to one standard, he's kind of bringing himself down at another.
Or perhaps he's being strict in both cases, right? I'm so strict in my observance of Shema, but I'm also strict in my observance of this is my role as an Istanis. So I'm gonna be just as consistent in following all of the rules that are applicable for there. So you could argue that either way. But what's so fascinating is in the 7th Mishnah now, we get a picture of his slave, Tavi. And this is one of the most unique cases that we actually have records in the Talmud in various different places that Tavi, the slave, even slept in the sukkah, which slaves were not supposed to, non-Jewish slaves, right? We're not talking about, it's like his servant, his house servant, but he would even sleep in the sukkah when it said that non-Jews are not supposed to sleep in the sukkah, and Tavi said, and Rabban Gamliel says, well, he's my slave, so it's different. And now we've got this one here. When Rabban Gamliel's slave Tavi died, Bob, you want to do this one?
He received words of comfort for him.
Okay. Do you guys know the concept of nichum avelim? That like you said shiva, right? So he sat shiva for his non-Jewish slave, which is very much outside the realm of regular normative practice, right? So now we went even farther to the other extreme. Okay, go ahead.
His
Students are going to
said
complain.
to him, "Didn't you teach us, our teacher, that one does not receive words of comfort for slaves?" He said to them, "My servant Tavi was not like other servants. He was kosher."
He was right. So this is my servant Tavi. Not only am I different than other people, but my servant was different than other servants. Right? He was kosher. He was acceptable. So he lived this life of ritual acceptableness that allowed it okay for Rabban Gamliel to sit shiva for his slave. What kind of picture are we forming now?
Well, it's sort of like Elazar.
In what sense?
Well, he's creating openings for himself. He's not the cistern that holds the rules and doesn't let anything get out.
Oh,
he's the one that's rounding the yuds and the rashas and the dalids.
Okay. But then so you're saying that Rabban Gamliel is actually like innovating new laws here?
Here are 3 examples of, they got in the book because, one might have imagined he would have gone along with the rules and instead he at least bent them.
Okay. Perhaps. Hi. Good evening.
Hi.
Sure. Okay, so then...
You got a problem with that?
No. What I'm trying to think about, though, is what sort of line is Rabban Gamliel treading here? Right? Is it that he's like...
he's trying to show what the outside limits of each rule, each situation are.
Okay. So therefore, is he declaring himself to be a person of privilege? Right? Or is he just saying that this is a very natural way of behaving as well, and most people don't do it yet, right? Meaning what's exceptional in my generation could become normative in the next generation. Or is he saying, no, I get a certain amount of privilege either because of my position as the Nasi, or because of my identification as an Istanis?
Well, yeah, each one of these things is that he's defining himself or somebody else out of the class that they might have been expected to have been in.
Okay. So he's willing to declare people as, for whatever reason, not fitting into the halachic boxes.
Yeah, so the rules are the same, just the people that they're supposed to apply to are exempt because they're exempt because they're in some kind of different class.
Right. But who's the one who puts them in that different class?
Gamliel.
It's always Rabban Gamliel.
Yeah.
Right? Notice he's the one identifying the classes that people are in, or the classifications of those people. Right? Until we get to Mishnah 8, which is now the next generation teaching. And look at what is taught. Bob, are you up or is Jeff? I think it's Jeff's turn, right?
If a groom wants to recite Shema on the first night, he may recite it.
Oh, look at that. A new Mishnah, which is exactly derived from our first one that started in number 5, which was a groom was...
Well, the exemption didn't mean he couldn't
Didn't
do
mean
it.
he couldn't.
It's now becoming more of a... Sounds like it becomes the standard.
It does become the standard.
Right.
And look at who's teaching this one.
The son of Rabban Gamliel.
Right, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. This is now exactly his next generation. So what Rabban Gamliel was doing, which was only for him at the time, is now becoming standard practice. Oh, by the way, some people do this, right? And this is what happens, and it becomes more acceptable, which I think is just a fascinating little example of how halacha evolves and develops over time. You sort of have probably the best example we have is like in the Shulchan Aruch, where the Ramah starts talking about, or the Rabbi Yosef Karo says that the law is that you should wait some time between eating meat to eating milk, and then they come up with this idea that really it's like an hour, and then the Ramah comes in from Poland and he says, well, an hour is good, but really it's better to wait 6 hours. And like over time, now all of a sudden you have vast amounts of groups of people who are now waiting 6 hours in between, and then some say 3 hours, and then you scale it back, or you have different interpretations. But it's sort of interesting that the strictures or the opportunities to do more mitzvot are what catch on, right? We don't have really a record of other people washing from mourning, and we don't have other people sitting shiva for their servants, but we do have these, oh, you want to do more mitzvot? Go ahead, right? And that seems to become something that is acceptable. And
Well, was it acceptable because he was Rabban, not...
right. And look at the concluding statement that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says.
Not everyone who wants to take on the divine name may take it on.
Right. So it's not up to everybody. It's only those who wants to recite Shema who are... It seems to be we need some other sort of clause here to classify it. Right? Those who are of that type that could handle it or that need to say it. One of my teachers. So there's in mourning there's also a practice to not learn Torah unless it's going to cause undue hardship. And one of my teachers actually said, when his mother passed, that he couldn't not learn Torah, so he had people over to learn Torah with him. And
Could you study Eicha or something?
He did some parts like that, but he also studied like Bava Metzia and other sections of Mishnayot that weren't necessarily in the standard. These are the ones that get studied in House of Mourning. So, which I thought was fascinating because I'd never heard anything like that before. But I guess it's
Who decides who? Not everyone who wants to.
Mm-hmm.
Who decides who?
Who gets to take the divine name?
Right.
What do you think?
They're not shirking their duty, so I would think.
Well, they're not shirking their duties to God.
Right.
But there might be other duties that they're not paying attention to.
Okay, so maybe the wife has to.
Right? So maybe the wife has to give permission, right? That'd be a very egalitarian type of setting, right?
Yeah, that's probably not it.
Or if he's willing to take on his superior obligation, then he can say the Shema.
Okay, right. So maybe it's as if he does his pressing matters first, right? Then he could have time for the Shema, perhaps.
Well, would it be inferred maybe too that if you do that, maybe you're holding yourself up to be something
to that standard,
yeah,
right? So then that means we really have to ask the question here from Rabban Gamliel, how is the Nasi viewed in this society, right? Is he the leader? Right? Is he a role model who others emulate to follow? Or is he somebody who's separate and has his own set of rules that others don't strive to follow but respect as being different?
I didn't think there were any more Nazis. Unless I've got the wrong word. Nasi is like Samuel.
Navi.
Oh, okay.
Those are prophets.
Yeah.
Nasi is like the president of the Beit Midrash.
Okay, sorry.
Right, that's okay. Right, so what we're going to notice is what is his place in the community and how does he relate to it. So maybe now let's take a break and look at the second source here, which we have Rabban Gamliel walking with Rabbi Yehoshua, or traveling on a ship. And maybe let's break into Chavruta a little bit, or we have a little triple Chavruta to give you guys a chance to read it over, and let's take a look now, because now we're going to actually see him interacting with his counterparts. We'll just leave it at that, and we'll figure out who the counterparts are. Right? And we'll come back in 10 minutes or so.
All right, Kathy, you want to... So why does Gamliel, so he has this flash of insight. It's actually given to him by Yehoshua. So why does he use the flash of insight to appoint these people who, are demonstrated not to have any seichel?
All right, should we try to read it through and
bail us out?
Maybe he thinks that they'll have to pay attention to those things instead of, it's sort of like the ivy tower in academia.
say more about that.
Well, a lot of times people put, academics down because they're like up in this ivy tower.
Ivory.
Ivory?
Mm-hmm.
It's
I thought it was ivy because of the ivy growing on the walls in Harvard or something.
Yes.
Okay, ivory tower. And that maybe he thinks that they will have to come down to a more practical level if they...
Well, so let's start off, right? The first clue we have is Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yoshua are both traveling on a ship. So the first question we should ask is, where were they going? Right? Obviously, Rabban Gamliel is not going for a sailing or a fishing trip, right? He probably had some business to do, which is why he'd have to go on the ship.
Yeah, but they seem to be coming home, at least because he winds up at the academy.
Okay, so maybe where were they coming from in that case? Right, but realistically, it's some sort of long-ish trip. And historically at this time, the ruling power over Israel was
Rome.
Okay, fantastic. So probably they were going to and from Rome, which means that, think about the position that Rabban Gamliel has. He has the Roman emperor's ear, right? He's able to talk to him directly. Maybe he has enough money to pay him off or anything. But clearly there's some sort of Rabban Gamliel is on that level that he can go to Rome and talk to the Caesar. So Rabban Gamliel brings bread. Why? Because we're going on a journey, so I need to have bread. Well, Rabbi Yoshua brings bread, but he also brings grains. Why is that significant?
He's prepared.
Okay, so he's prepared. Which is going to spoil faster? Bread. So if it's a short journey, meaning like a 3 days, the bread might be okay. But Rabbi Yoshua says, well, I know that there's this star that exists every 70 years or so, and it confuses sailors. And I thought it might be around, and it would confuse us. And so therefore I came prepared. And Rabban Gamliel is so struck by this, right? Because he says, you are so knowledgeable, but what is so knowledgeable mean? Like, what is that word referring to in Rabban Gamliel's mind?
Torah.
You're so knowledgeable about Torah, so therefore why do you spend your time earning a living by sailing on this boat? How does Rabban Gamliel get all of his money? Well, what's his job?
Being the head of the academy.
He's the head of the academy. So people got to pay admission to get into his Beit Midrash, right? So therefore, he gets a lot of money for being really good at teaching Torah. So it's astounding to him, well, how come every Torah scholar isn't making a bunch of money like I am?
So this guy is making his living on the boat?
Rabbi Yoshua seems to be making his living on a boat. Or at least part of the time he at least knows how to navigate this, maybe if he's not entirely there. We'll actually, in our next story, we'll get a clearer glimpse of what Rabbi Yoshua does with his time. But already, we could ask, before when Rabban Gamliel was acting in the earlier Mishnahs, what was his awareness of the people watching him? Like,
that
try to
he
think
was setting
linearly.
the example, or they were looking at him.
Do you think he was aware that they were looking at him, though?
Absolutely.
You think so?
I would think so.
Okay. Any other thoughts?
I've got to flip back.
That's okay. It's still there. It's not like a computer you have to hit the back browser. You can actually just turn a page. It's...
Running low on paper power.
Well, he wouldn't Rabban Gamliel have expected that his students would have said to him, "You're doing this, you're doing that." Why?
Maybe, but look at the scenes that he's in.
He
Yeah,
seems,
why would they be watching him in his wedding
Why are they
night?
watching him on his wedding night in his bedroom? I mean, I have a hard time believing that it's open curtain season
Right,
for everybody.
right.
Like, okay, here's what I do on the evening after I'm married. Like, if so, then that's a huge violation of public versus private, which maybe is part of the tension that we're feeling here. But
So how are we finding these things out if he's not
more-
making them aware at some
he's
point?
more holy
they're-
than he seems to think he has to be more holy than everybody else.
perhaps, but in doing so, right, what might end up happening is
maybe he's not.
he creates that divide where he's so focused on his own path that he's even unaware that people were watching him.
Oh wait, aren't the like in-laws supposed to be watching what goes on in the bedchamber?
No,
To-
they don't watch what's going on.
Yeah, to ensure that the groom doesn't come out and say that she's not improperly
They
that she's not a
take her
virgin.
sheet.
But again, they're still outside. Oh, so you're saying maybe if the students were outside also, because he was such a great teacher, that they'd be right outside
Holy.
waiting to hear the results or whatever? I don't know. That's,
I think they take the sheet out.
Well, they do.
yeah.
But they don't watch.
I don't know. This is already beyond the realm of my knowledge. All I was reading from this is that if Rabban Gamliel is talking to Rabbi Yehoshua, who, by the way, we have many stories. Rabbi Yehoshua is like his chavruta, that the two of them would travel back and forth. They would have many arguments. Our next story is going to feature a very strong argument between the two of them. And yet, even though, right, like they're traveling on a boat together, so they clearly, Rabbi Yehoshua is going with him to see the Caesar. This is, imagine now the relationship that he's got his ear, right? He's sort of the vice principal or whatever, or vice president, I guess, even though he doesn't have an official title. He's the one who Rabban Gamliel gets to go to all the time to make his claims. But he really doesn't even know a whole lot about Rabbi Yehoshua. Right? He says, "You know so much. I always see you in the Beit Midrash. What are you doing here what are you doing on this boat? Why do you have so much knowledge about this stuff too?" Right? It seems to be that Rabban Gamliel is just out of touch with his students. Right? He connects to them on a Torah level, but he doesn't know them as people. And perhaps that's part of the politics of it, or perhaps that's part of his power separation, right? That I want to only see you in one capacity, and I don't want to have you in the other one. Rabbi Yehoshua then deflects the response and says, instead of wondering about me, look at two of your greatest students, right? The greatest students here who are so good, they can estimate the amount of drops in the ocean, and yet it's not that they're not able to, but what is Rabbi Yehoshua highlighting about the true plight of a Torah scholar?
They don't take care of. They don't work.
Right? Is that it's really hard for them to find work. And these are even guys who are brilliant, right? They have, to the degree, look at how intelligent they are. So therefore, Rabban Gamliel, I understand for you, your intelligence is your measure of success, but for the rest of us, normal people, it doesn't get to happen that way. Remember the headline I even put at the top of the page of the first one, because that was, now I'll give it away, but people don't usually read the headers, but we said Rabban Gamliel's famous quote was, "I am
Not like any other
not
man.
like any other man."
And he said this.
Right?
down
And he
here.
said it down there.
Yeah.
But now we're starting to see what it looks like in practice.
He holds himself above.
He holds himself up there, but even he just isn't aware of what the normal people do, right? He spends all his time going to and from Rome, learning in the academy, in the Beit Midrash, that he doesn't have to have another profession. He doesn't need, right? He got it all. Oh, you know what I forgot to tell you? Rabban Gamliel's great-great-grandfather was Hillel Hazaken, the famous Hillel, who opened up the Beit Midrash and was there, right? So then, from him, you had Hillel, and then there was Rabban Shimon, and then there was Shimon ben sorry. Then there was Rabban Gamliel Hazaken, so the first Gamliel, and then his son was Shimon ben Gamliel, and then his son is Rabban Gamliel. So let me do this here.
So from there you get leniencies too. You know, if he came from Hillel.
So he came from Hillel, right? So that's the power. And by the way, Hillel is no, that can't be. Hillel converted, right? No, Hillel was the student of converts. But I think he was he descended from King David?
Sounds
I
familiar.
think so. I think so. Either way, this is a pretty big line. So Hillel's son, for some reason, I have it in my mind that Hillel was descended from King David. But Hillel's son was Shimon. No, wait. Sorry, we had Gamliel. Then we had Shimon ben Gamliel. And then we have the second Gamliel. And this is our guy. Right, so his great-grandfather. No, wait, I missed a Shimon. There's one more in there. There we go. So it's his great-great-grandfather. That makes sense. So he comes from that line. And then, actually, if we fast forward, then his son is the one who we had in that first Mishnah, Shimon ben Gamliel. Is this confusing enough that they just keep using the same name and bouncing back and forth every generation? But then his son, if I got this right, yes. Shimon ben Gamliel's son is Rabbi
Ben Shimon.
Yehuda Hanasi.
No joke.
Right. So Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi is very famous because he's the guy that we say can take credit for
Mishnah.
compiling all of the Mishnah.
He was the redactor.
Right? He was the redactor of the Mishnah. And by the way, who was his grandfather?
Gamliel.
Rabban Gamliel. So what's neat here about the stories that we're seeing and what gets included and what's put in, probably Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi had a very particular bend as to why these were the Mishnayot that were included that got to teach about this line. So anyway, so Gamliel, he's not a lightweight, right? He's got very, very strong lineage, very, very powerful. But again, coming from that world, it's sort of like, I don't want to make the old money analogy, but that sort of kind of fits, right? That he was sort of born into it, right? He was born into this greatness. He had Torah scholars all around him. He had everything provided for him, no hardships. And he just assumes that everybody is like this because he hangs out with other people who learn just as much as he does. And so therefore, why would it be any different? Well, Rabbi Yoshua, who's able to talk to him directly, by the way, notice that he's not anything other than just Rabbi Yehoshua, and he comes in and says to him, hello, you've got other students too, who are the same way, who don't have employment because they spend all their time learning, and you need to be able to balance that out, and it's not easy for the rest of us. We don't just have this. So then Rabban Gamliel says, well, then I'll give them top positions. Why? Why is Rabban Gamliel doing this now?
So they get paid.
That's right. I'm going to help them out.
Oh.
Right? I'll give them a job. Oh, fine. You told me they didn't have work. Well, I'll give them jobs that they can be teachers in my school. All right? And then he goes and he asks for them and they don't come. Why not? Right? What were they afraid of here?
Maybe they didn't think they fit the bill.
In what sense?
That well, it says you think I'm offering you a position of authority. Maybe they didn't feel that they had authority.
So maybe they didn't feel that they had authority, or what else?
Well, I mean, one, maybe they felt like it's a possibility if he's asking for them, they might have done something, or there may have been, maybe it wasn't a good thing.
Okay. Well, let's keep going. Let's even assume that they know what he's asking them for, and maybe how now would it not be a good thing?
Did they feel that they had to support the academy out of their resources, which they didn't have?
No, I think that they were going to be employed by the academy.
And they knew that.
Yeah. I mean, it would seem to make sense that they knew what he was asking for. But there's clearly something that's preventing them from saying, of course we'll be your head teachers or we'll be your top teachers.
The first thing comes to mind, with me is humility.
Mm-hmm. Right, so absolutely humility could be a part of it. But I'm going to frame it.
Maybe they're looking to Rabbi Gamliel and say, I don't want to live like him.
Remember, the neat thing about the stories is we always have it at the end. There's always a punchline, right? So what were you saying, Jeff? Go ahead.
They look to what Rabban Gamliel does, and they say, maybe that's not such a great thing. I don't know that I really want to do that.
Beautiful, right? Maybe they're afraid of what's going to happen to us if we lose touch with common man, if we lose touch with common man. We saw what happened to Rabban Gamliel, right? And they said, we don't want that type of position. We're not interested in the power, because with the power comes the politics, right? And with the politics comes bribery or the Romans and the influence. And right, we wanted to be top Torah scholars. We don't want to have to worry about our public lives and our private lives and that where that line gets blurred. We just want to do what we're doing.
So Gamliel says, don't worry about it. You're slaves, not masters.
Well, and then the other thing, if we want to even read into it a little bit more, he says, do you think I'm offering you a position of authority? Right.
That's kind of nasty.
Of course not. Why?
Because he thinks he's the authority.
Because he's the authority. Right? Because I'm different than every other person. I'm the lead authority. I'll give you positions where you can have influence, you can have power, but you don't get to be the authorities. Right? Now, incidentally, he also says something very true about the nature of leadership. Right? I think you guys picked up on that one in your Chavruta learning, that he said this is not a position of authority, but rather it's a position of
servitude.
Yeah, but he wasn't being figurative, he's being literal.
Absolutely. Right? That's what a leader does. A leader is a servant of the people. The ironic piece is that Rabban Gamliel has no clue about the people that he's serving. Right? Mm-hmm. So now we're starting to see he was this super, super powerful guy, but his leadership tactics or his leadership awareness, maybe he's not so in touch with what his people need from him as the leader. It's more about what he wants to do for the people. We have a couple other stories, which we probably won't get to tonight, but where they talk about different people were coming in to testify for Rosh Chodesh. They would say, I saw a part of the moon, and Rabban Gamliel had pictures that he would show people. Right? So he assumed that people had they wouldn't describe it to him, but he says, was it like this or was it like this? And they had to point to one of the pictures. Right? So he really is saying I'm not going to assume that orientation of east or west or anything like that. Was it look like this or did it look like this? Right? And so and he accepts testimony of people that way, even when others wouldn't. But I think that the one other story that I will share now is that it actually ended up. There's one of these calculations where Rabbi Yehoshua said that it didn't count as Rosh Chodesh. Because it couldn't have worked mathematically based on the number of days of the month. Rabban Gamliel accepted the testimony and declared it to be Rosh Chodesh, and as the Nasi, he got to do that. And then Rabbi Yehoshua was upset, and he said, you're changing the rules. We can't, there's a certain protocol we have to follow here. And Rabban Gamliel says to him, I want you to go out walking in the streets on Yom Kippur, by your calculator of Yom Kippur, not by my calculations. They were off by a day, right? So he says, I want you to go on the day that you think is Yom Kippur. I want you to take your walking stick and your pouch, and I want you to walk through the town. So that way everybody knows that you're conceding to my judgment, right? And Rabbi Yehoshua is like, how can this be? How did you, right? But he does it, right? And Rabban Gamliel praises him and says, you're my student and my master. Right, my student because you accepted my teachings, but my master because you're demonstrating how to, live properly or something like that. And so that's a very famous scene. But what ends up being is that Rabbi Yehoshua, as you see, is sort of subjugating himself to Rabban Gamliel. And then the next story, which is the one that we'll do together here to conclude, this is a relatively well-known story for those who've read it before. I guess that's sort of how I classify stories in the Talmud. Is if I've learned it more than once, it means it's well known. If I've only learned it once, it means I just came across it recently. So So this is one that a lot of people like to teach because it's got some nice, some banter back and forth. But we're going to look at it specifically through Rabban Gamliel's eyes. This starts with quoting a line from a Mishnah, right, which is talking about. We're still in Masechet Brachot, but this is now, instead of talking about Shema, this is the 4th chapter, which talks about when is the proper time to say the Amidah. And so we've gone through the morning Amidah, and we've gone through the afternoon Amidah, and now we have the evening service. And the question is, when do we say the evening Tefillah, the evening Amidah? And the Mishnah gives us this line that says the evening prayer has no fixed limit. The Gemara says, what do you mean no fixed limit? Right? Couldn't you just do it all night then? Why doesn't it just say the time to do it is all night? And they say, no. What no fixed limit means is that the evening Tefillah, the evening Amidah, is optional. Okay? Because Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, with regard to the evening Tefillah, Rabban Gamliel says that it is mandatory, but Rabbi Yehoshua says that it's optional. So interesting. Who are we following now?
Rabbi Yeshua.
It seems to be that that's what the Mishnah is saying. But Abaye comes in and says the halacha is, as stated by the one who says that it is mandatory, and Rava says that the halacha follows the one who says it is optional. Right? Now, Rava and Abaye are already Amoraim, so they're part of the Talmudic discussion, whereas Gamliel and Yehoshua are still part of the Mishnah time. So what's neat is we're sort of seeing that this debate hasn't been resolved yet. Even though we're about to see a story that's going to resolve the debate, still 4 or 5 generations later, Rava and Abaye come in and are still arguing about what this means, that the evening service doesn't have a fixed time limit. And by the way, in modern days, you know how we reconcile that? Fun little trivia tidbit. In Shacharit, which is a mandatory Amidah, the community says it, and then the Chazan repeats it. Right? We have Kedusha that we all say together. In Mincha, same thing. Right? There's the Kedusha that is said out loud by everybody all together. In Mariv, though, there's no repetition. And that's the Gemara's way, or I guess that's the Halacha's way of balancing that this is actually an optional service, but it's not an optional service entirely, so it's still mandatory to do Mariv, to pray 3 times a day, out of deference to the forefathers, but we're just not going to include an out loud portion that everybody has to say, so that way it still gives deference to the fact those who say it was optional. Fun trivia tidbit.
Yeah.
But let's get to this story now, because here's where we get, this is kind of fun. It's related that a certain disciple came before Rabbi Yehoshua and asked him, anybody want to do this?
Is the evening tefillah mandatory or optional?
And by the way, anytime we say tefillah, we really mean the Amidah. All the other pieces are like set up, like they're warm-ups or cool-downs from the Amidah. So
he replied, it is optional. He then presented himself before Rabban Gamliel and asked him.
He is the student, by the way.
Is the evening tefillah mandatory or optional? He replied, it is mandatory.
Okay. So this is exactly as our first paragraph said. Rabbi Yehoshua says it's optional. Rabban Gamliel says it's mandatory. Who's the leader of the Beit Midrash, though? Gamliel. So therefore, what is Rabbi Yehoshua going to do?
Defer to Gamliel.
Absolutely, right? He's not going to make a case here.
Right here.
Okay. Now, we have our student, right? But he said, this is our student here.
Did not Rabbi Yehoshua tell me that it is optional?
Boom, boom. Them's be fighting words here. Right? What just happened? We have this student is trying to incite a little controversy here. Seems to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
He said, wait till the Torah scholars enter the Beit Midrash. When the Torah scholars came in, someone rose and inquired, is the evening tefillah mandatory or optional? Rabban Gamliel replied, it is mandatory. Said Rabban Gamliel to the sages, is there anyone who disputes this? Rabbi Yehoshua replied to him, no.
Okay, so what just happened here?
He
gave
up, right? He conceded. He says, I'm not going to argue with you. You're the Nasi of the Beit Midrash, right? The times that I argue with you are when we're one-on-one on a boat. Right? That's the times that it's for me to push your buttons and for me to press you and to challenge you about your policies and your governance. When we're standing in the Beit Midrash, though, I don't do that. I don't contradict you. Okay? So go ahead.
He
But
said
Rabban
to-
Gamliel is not content with that, so he's going to push harder.
He said to him, "Did they not report you to me as saying that it is optional?" He then went on, "Yehoshua, stand up and let them testify against you."
Okay, so you guys are seeing this scene, right? Like Gamliel is in the middle of right, he's at the front of the Beit Midrash, and he's yelling, "It's mandatory. Who disagrees with me?" Nobody. But come on, you just said a few minutes ago that you said it was optional. I know, I heard this from you. And Rabbi Yeshua, stand up and testify, right? So now you've got all the learning going on. At this point, probably, like, classes are fading away because they want to see what's going on with this scene. All right, and what does Rabbi Yoshua
Rabbi
say?
Yeshua stood up and said, "Were I alive and he the questioner dead, the living could contradict the dead.
Meaning, what could I say?
But now that he is alive and I am alive, how can the living contradict the living? I must confess I issued that ruling."
Okay, is that meaning Rabbi Yoshua could have retracted had the questioner not been present there, right? Or had it right? He could have said, "No, I never said that. I concede to you." But because the questioner's sitting right there in the room and he's still alive, we don't disrespect people when they're alive still, right? Even if he might have wanted to retract his statement, he has to be honest and say, "I actually did say that, yes." So what happened next is amazing. Who's going to read this for us?
But now that he is alive and I am alive, did we read that already?
Yeah, that was the part that we just
Rabban
read.
Gamliel remained sitting and expounding, and Rabbi Yehoshua remained standing until all the people there began to shout and
Hold
say,
on. So wait a minute. So now let's draw our scene here. We've got the Beit Midrash. Okay? We have Rabban Gamliel sitting here, and then we've got all the different tables and whatever. This is learning here, and Rabbi Yeshua is standing right here. And Rabban Gamliel says, "Come on, stand up and testify." He does. And then what does Rabban Gamliel do as soon as he hears from Rabbi Yeshua? Gotcha, right?
sits down.
Presumably he would sit when he was teaching, right? So he just continues with the lesson. And meanwhile, Rabbi Yeshua is standing there, embarrassed in front of the entire Beit Midrash. And Rabban Gamliel is just continuing with the lesson like it's no big deal. And by the way the lessons worked is Rabban Gamliel would sort of say a piece, and then there was a meturgaman, a translator there, who would expound upon the stuff that the nasi, that the teacher was saying. Other possibility is that Rabban Gamliel would sort of say something quietly, and then the other guy would yell it loud for the whole rest of the Beit Midrash, and that was like his job was. It's unclear what the role was, if it was either to sort of elucidate, like in more depth, what the teacher said, or if it was just to amplify what the teacher was saying.
That sounds like the second in command.
No, he doesn't think on his own. He just
Oh.
repeats the words.
Oh,
Right.
But you said expanding on.
Meaning that they prepared the lesson beforehand.
Okay.
So all I have to do is say the biblical verse, and then you'll say my explanation on it.
Okay.
Right, like that type of thing. But what's really neat is what's the Turgaman's name?
Chutzpah.
Chutzpah. What does that sound like?
Chutzpah.
Absolutely, right? I think this is the Gemara's humor here, right? This is the Gemara telling us the people began to shout, and they were shouting at Chutzpah, right? What did they say to him?
Stop.
Stop! What are you doing translating the lesson for him? Don't you see that this guy is being publicly humiliated here in the Beit Midrash? How dare you? That's chutzpah. Don't just copy his words. You're not a brainless, mindless nothing. You can have some decency as well. So finally, when the people yell, "Stop, stop, stop," he stops translating. And now all of the people, I don't know who the people are, but this is the they, collectively in the Beit Midrash. Go ahead, Bob. They say,
How long is he, Rabban Gamliel, to go on insulting him, Rabbi Yehoshua? On New Year last year, he insulted him by forcing him to carry his walking stick on Yom Kippur. That's that story.
That's the story that I just shared with you, right?
He insulted him in the manner of the firstborn in the affair of Rabbi Zadok. So what's that?
It was
Now
an
he insults
issue.
him again.
Rabbi Tzadok is a Kohen, and the rule was outside of the Beit Hamikdash. So if you have an animal, and then you're supposed to offer, and you give it to the Kohen, he's supposed to offer it up on the altar, unless it accidentally develops a blemish. Then the Kohen can just burn it and eat it for himself, and it doesn't go to God. So Rabbi Tzadok had he had a sheep or a cow, I guess, that someone gave to him, and then it accidentally developed a blemish, and so he wanted to offer it himself. And the question that was suspect was, well, he's a Kohen, so maybe he put the blemish on. Can he be trusted? And Rabbi Yehoshua said, no, well, Rabban Gamliel says he's a great Torah scholar, so we can trust him. Rabbi Yehoshua says, no, we can't, because we don't take his own word, because he stands to benefit from having an invalid offering. He gets to eat more meat, so maybe it's in his best interest to lie. So they had that argument, and then Rabban Gamliel trumps Rabbi Yehoshua in that case as well. That's really all you have to know about that. I don't want to go into it because it gets into weird laws of purities and impurities and sacrifices and stuff, it's neat, but it's not our focus for tonight. How about that?
Come, let us depose him.
Okay, right. So Gamliel this is not just a one-time thing. Rabban Gamliel has a history of poking at Rabbi Yehoshua, subjugating him, right, oppressing him, really sort of putting him in his place.
Was the Beit Midrash always this lively and contentious?
Well, the stories we have, according to those stories, yeah. But I don't think they'd tell us about the times when everybody came in and just sat quietly and there were no disagreements. It's not a very good story.
Why don't his grandson make sure that all these, less than, stories that cast him in less than a totally positive light get in?
Well, this is the Talmud. This is post Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi now. Right. This was Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi was the Mishnah on the first page. But maybe we learn from him, right? Certainly in the second source that we saw, that's in Masechet Horiot, which is a collection of a lot of leadership errors, I guess it's even classified as. This is where all the leaders who made mistakes end up in this book, so we can learn from them. But Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi wouldn't have put that part in. That would be Ravina and Ravashi would be the redactors of the Talmud. So those stories clearly came from somewhere, but it seems like, according to here, the image that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi is that he wants his grandfather, Rabban Gamliel, to be known as somebody special, somebody powerful. But the Talmud says, well, look what happens, though, when he gets too much power and he loses touch with that personal aspect, right? He's so focused on the ruling, on the teaching. So what's the ruling? Nobody opposes? Great. That issue is resolved, and he moves on. He doesn't think about the interpersonal aspect, because that's not anything that he ever had to worry about, right? But let's go. So now the people rise up and they say, let us depose him, right? We got to get rid of this guy.
Whom shall he appoint instead? We can't appoint Rabbi Yehoshua because he is one of the parties involved.
Okay, that seems pretty obvious, right? Keep going.
We can't appoint Rabbi Akiva because perhaps Rabban Gamliel will bring a curse on him, since Akiva has no ancestral merit. He was a convert.
Right, so we want Akiva as the other great that we see around, but for lineage, he doesn't have the lineage, so we're not going to put him in there. Okay?
Let us then appoint Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah.
Remember, by the way, Rabban Gamliel did have the lineage, right, coming directly from the line of Hillel. Okay, sorry, keep going. Elazar ben Azariah.
So maybe this isn't such a great idea because they have to stretch so much to do this.
So, right, well, we'll see what's involved in doing it.
They're getting hot in doing this, but maybe it's not such a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, let us then appoint Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah, who is wise and rich and the 10th descendant from Ezra. He is wise so that if anyone puts a question to him, he will be able to answer it.
Okay, great.
He is rich so that even if he needs to pay Caesar, he will be able to do so.
Okay, great.
He is 10th in descent from Ezra, so that he has ancestral merit, and he, Rabban Gamliel, cannot bring a curse on him.
Okay, so what are the three qualifications they want for their leaders?
Blood, money, and brains.
Blood, money, and brains. Okay? Rabban Gamliel had all three of those, but it's pretty clear that not so many others had that. Right? And it's fascinating to me, like whenever the Gemara includes discussions and says, let's put this guy, well, we can't use this guy because of this. We can't use this guy because of this. It's sort of showing you, at least we're getting a little glimpse into how rare it was to have the blood and the money and the brains. Because obviously brains was the first criteria, right? So Rabbi Akiva had that, great. But then he didn't have the blood, so then that's the second thing we look at. And then the third is the money, right? We want to make sure that he can support the Beit Midrash and keep things moving and pay off the guards or, whatever has to be done. Right? Pay taxes, I guess, to the Caesar.
But I'm always curious about what this means, bring a curse on him, because it sounds kind of primitive.
Well, think of it more of like I mean, the word in Aramaic is anish, like punishment.
Oh, okay.
Maybe like he'll defame him, or he'll slander him or something. Maybe that type of, not like a voodoo type of curse. More like he'll curse his name type of thing. Is that fair enough? Mm-hmm. All right. So now they go to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah and they ask him, "Will the master consent to become the head of the academy?" And he says, as all smart leaders do,
"I'll consult the members of my family."
Right? So he goes and he checks with his wife
I have
first.
to talk to my wife. She may want to retire.
Fantastic, right? Like, good for you. Way to go, man. You know what's up. Right? This is something we can all learn from. This is a different type of leader already than Rabban Gamliel. Notice that, right? On Rabban Gamliel's wedding night, he puts his wife priority second. His connection with God was first. Elazar ben Azariah is presented with the ultimate opportunity here, right? You're head of the university, and he says, "Let me just check with my wife first," right? So he's got a little different priorities that we're seeing here, and I think that highlights, right? If we read those details, the reason that they're including these details is for us to pay attention to them. So there's any number of ways you could read it, but I think this one for sure is highlighting for us that Elazar ben Azariah thinks differently than Rabban Gamliel does.
Is this the guy that's in the
Haggadah? Yeah, this is actually the part of the story that's in the Haggadah.
Okay.
You're going to see the lines, the famous line there.
It's the wife that decides he's going to leave the position. Oh, my wife and I decided.
Well, so now let's see. So he goes and he consults his wife. Kathy, do you want to read this part? She said to him,
perhaps they will depose you later on.
Okay, so is that an argument for taking the job or against taking the job? Against, right? If they did this to Rabban Gamliel, maybe they'll do it to you.
Yeah.
So don't take it. So what does he say to her?
There is a proverb: let a man use a cup of honor for one day, even if it be broken the next.
Yeah, the translation is rough, but basically, what's his response to her?
You take it for one day, even though you never know what that future
right,
is.
Meaning, at least I had my hurrah, right? Even if I'm only king for a day, being king for a day is better than never having been king at all, right? So,
she said to him, "You have no white hair." He was 18 years.
Okay, she says, "No one's going to respect you." Right? That's what the white hair means, right? It's
18.
not. Yeah, so he was 18 years old.
And a miracle happened for him, and the 18 rows of hair on his beard turned white.
Okay, and this is the famous line. That's why Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said,
"Behold, I am like a 70-year-old man," and he did not say simply 70 years old.
Right, so he doesn't say, "I'm a 70-year-old," but rather he says, "Oh, look, I'm now like a 70-year-old man." Now, interestingly, whenever we have numbers like 70, by the way, did you notice before that every 70 years in the other story? And,
right.
Right. So 7 is a big number in Talmudic literature. Whenever we think of the number 7, what would be our associations that we think of throughout the Bible?
The week.
Okay, days of the week, which is actually days of creation of the
and
world,
also
right?
what's it called? The years between
Sabbatical year, right? 7 years, 6 years working the land, and the 7th year is a year of rest. Oh, interesting. I never thought of that.
What
If you
did you
add
say?
up all of the fathers, the patriarchs and matriarchs together, it gets 7. I never thought of that. That's pretty cool.
It's like life and death. Shiva. I mean, everything.
Right, so you have that week of transition Shiva, right? But again, this theme of 7 seems to be representing completion. Anytime we have a 7 day, the world is created in 7 days. By the way, fun little Devar Torah, if you ever at somewhere and someone wants to talk about Shabbat. So if the world was created in 6 days, why do we say the world is created in 7 days? Because part of creation is appreciating, right? Yeah. If you're a party planner, it's not just plan the party and then leave. It's plan the party, take a step back, and look at the party that you just created, right? Look at the event. If you dentist, right? So you filled the tooth, take a moment to appreciate your work, right? And say, I did that very well. And that's part of the creative process too, right? If you're a contractor or whatever, you build the house, take a moment before you leave to look at the work that you've done. Right, I think that's what Shabbat teaches us. That's why we say the world was created in 7 days. So there you go. You got a fun trivia tidbit, and you get a fun Dvar Torah too. But anyway, so 7 is that completion, right? 7 years for the land cycle to rest and be complete. After 7 sevens, then we get our Jubilee year when all the slaves go free and all debts are forgiven and everything. So 7 seems to be something complete. So when he says, I'm like a 70-year-old man, I think really what it means here then is probably referring to his knowledge, right? That my knowledge is complete like a person of 70 would be, right? It gives us that image of complete knowledge again, that now I'm respected entirely or something. Okay, so now he becomes the new head of the Beit Midrash, and changes are going to ensue. All right, Bob, you want to read about the first one, the Tana taught?
Tana taught, on that day the doorkeeper was removed, and...
Hold on. What does he say? Go ahead, read it again.
The doorkeeper was removed.
We got to pay attention to that fact. What does that mean, the doorkeeper was removed?
Anybody can come in.
So now anybody can come in. What was it like?
Open admissions.
Open admission now. Which means we have to ask, what was the Beit Midrash like when Rabban Gamliel was there?
Hard to get in.
Hard to get in. Clearly he had some standards, right? So what would have been the standards that he would have imposed?
Brains and money.
Maybe you had to take an admissions test, right? Or maybe you had to, right? So it was only the elitist. This was the Harvard Beit Midrash, right? Or can we say that here? It's the Michigan Beit Midrash, right? Right?
Actually, Harvard is thinking about getting rid of tuition.
Is they really?
That's what I read.
Wow.
So well endowed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So right, maybe you have the elite intellectual place, or maybe the other one is only those who can afford to come to the Beit Midrash pay to come in, and the doorkeeper is there taking their entrance fee. But clearly there's some sort of distinction of Torah is not for everybody. It's only for the best and brightest, or whatever his classification is. I don't even think we have to know what the classification is. Just the fact that there was a doorkeeper, right, is a huge statement. So now, sorry for interrupting you. Go ahead, though.
Doorkeeper was removed, and permission was given to the students to enter. For Rabban Gamliel had issued a proclamation saying, "No disciple whose inside is not like his exterior may enter the Beit Midrash."
Yeah, what does that mean?
Well, it can't be phony.
Okay, can't be phony. So therefore, he's saying that what types of people was he looking for in the Beit Midrash?
Well, responsible, studious people.
Okay, so
Purity?
So you had to have an interior classification of probably good manners. What else would go, like, what do we think of good Torah scholars? What would their inside be? Humble. Honest. Deferent, right? Maybe dedicated to their learning,
studious.
Right? Focused, studious, absolutely, right? But what's interesting is the way that he says it. He doesn't give any of those adjectives, right? He says your inside has to be like your outside. What does that show us about how Rabban Gamliel saw people?
He was telling the book by the cover?
Absolutely, I think, right? Is that what we're seeing here is that he didn't take time to get to know people's insides, because your inside has to be like your outside, because that's the part that he sees of you. He's not learning who the people were. He's not finding out about your hobbies.
He doesn't really know about their inside. He just assumes that...
He doesn't know his students. He just knows them. He doesn't know about them.
And presumably the doorkeeper had to be the one who was the judge, right? He's the bouncer at the club. I mean, think about it, right? People go to clubs, and if you're not dressed in a particular way, or if you don't look a particular style, you don't, I'm not so well versed on the club life, but like I've seen it in movies that, like, the dorky looking guys are always waiting in the line, and then the other ones come through and they look cool, and they have this particular dress, and they go through, and they're like, wait, how come they got to go through? And he says, because they fit the bill. They were the right type that we're looking for here. So presumably this was a bouncer who was doing the same thing here, but he clearly had instructions from Rabban Gamliel that I only want people who look like this in my Beit Midrash, or they act like this, or present themselves in a certain way. Yeah. All right. I keep interrupting you, but you're reading such great lines.
Good reasons.
So we want to. Yeah.
On that day, many benches were added.
Oh, wait a minute. So now
Another democratic.
More students.
Now we're much more democratic. We're open to many more types of students and just many more students. Okay, keep going.
Rabbi Yochanan said, there is a difference of opinion on this matter between Abba Yosef ben Dostai and the rabbis. One authority says that 400 stools were added, and the other says 700. Either way, it's a whole lot.
Okay, right.
And there's the 7.
Right, and there's a 7 again, and also with 4, we have a lot of different 4s come up, certainly all throughout Pesach. But in general, I think 4 represents sort of your personal 4 amot. Everybody gets, they say like dalet amot of personal space. That like this is my individuality. And so either 400 were added, meaning every student became individualized, right? That we got to see each person had their own place and their own piece. Or what we're seeing is that there were just 700 and it was just a complete learning extravaganza, right? Like Limud Detroit is going to be, there's your plug there. Right? That you have your 400, your 700. Also notice we don't even know which side of the debate says which one, right? So it's clearly not important whose opinion was 400 and whose was 700, just that either what started happening is the learning became more individualized and people, had their own recognition, right? Identities even, or it was just a complete overhaul of learning and just the whole country is now learning. Either way, it's still very different than what Rabban Gamliel had going on.
So Rabban Gamliel wasn't ejected. It says next, Rabban Gamliel became alarmed. So he was there.
He was there.
This. So he wasn't on the street. He was actually a student inside.
Correct. So he was just deposed as the head, but he, again, had no other profession, no other skills. So what does he do with his life? Goes to learn. That's what he did.
All right, so Rabban Gamliel became alarmed and said, perhaps, God forbid, I withheld Torah from Israel.
Oh, now he starts to feel remorse. I see that when the rules are different, right, this is a huge awakening for him. Keep going.
He was shown in his dream white casks full of ashes. The Torah they were learning was empty. This, however...
Is it a casket?
A cask, like a jar.
A jar, okay.
Yeah. And the white casks, interesting. Notice the color interplay here. This is going to become relevant in just another moment. Sorry, Bob, what does it mean that if they were white casks, but they were full of ashes?
Well, it says the Torah they were learning was empty. That's the explanation for that.
Yeah, well, that's what Rashi says. I mean, we could interpret it other ways, but I think the point
ashes
is...
Ashes are, mourning.
Ashes are mourning, right? That's only what happens. How do you get ashes?
Dying.
Well, you burn something, right? Usually wood is what we would think of, right? You burn the wood.
So is he burning all these students? Just their, all the learning and all the students are now ashes.
Well, what's the metaphor that we always think of when we want to talk about Torah as being a sign of life and vibrancy and growth?
A tree.
So either tree, right? But if you burn the tree, then you no longer have it. So there's another source that we go to. And this was actually last week. We talked about Elazar ben Azariah and or Elazar ben Arach and Eliezer ben Hyrcanus. We said they were both metaphors of...
Got the sheep from last week?
Well, the cistern that didn't lose a drop of water, or the other one was the overflowing stream, right? The brook or the spring, right? So again, water imagery. Right, so realistically, if we think about a jug or a pitcher, if it was going to represent Torah learning,
Full of water.
It should have been full of water.
Not ashes.
Right? But he had this dream that says, don't worry, the learning that they're doing, it's not real learning, Rabban Gamliel. You had real learning. Right? Because remember, what was going on in your Beit Midrash, you had that standard, you had real Torah going on. Right? So he had this dream, and that made him feel better.
But it didn't mean anything because he was only shown this dream to appease him.
Right, and that's the Stama's comment there, right? The storyteller is coming in and letting us know that, by the way, Rabban Gamliel was actually wrong, right? Or just that he wasn't in touch with his people. So now we're learning. Okay, can I just paraphrase this next paragraph because it gets really technical, but it's. Masechet Eduyot was taught on that day. What's unique about Eduyot as a tractate is that it's really like a hodgepodge of different halachot and different topics of study, whereas most others are grouped by theme or by category. This is grouped by who said what. And so it starts off with Hillel said this, Hillel said this, Hillel said this, Shammai said this, Shammai said this, Shammai said this. And then you get the next wave of people, they said this, which it's sort of neat, like the Talmud saying, like, look, this is what they were learning that day. It's all about lineage. It's all about where the learning comes from. And then they start talking about any time that you have this expression on that day, like in other parts of the Talmud, it's talking about this day of when the Beit Midrash was overturned. Now, look at what he says. There's no halacha, we're looking at the dash in line 4. There was no halacha which had been left unresolved in the Beit Midrash that was not fully elucidated. So look at how much learning is going on now. People, any questions you have, all of them are getting answered. Right now, I feel like this is hyperbole, but maybe it was just amazing. Either way, it still works. And Rabban Gamliel also did not withhold himself from the Beit Midrash even a single hour. Right? That's what Bob pointed out before. As we have learned, on that day, Judah, an Ammonite from the nation of Ammon, he was a convert, came before them in the Beit Midrash. He said to them, "Am I permitted to enter the assembly?" Meaning, can I marry a Jew? Rabbi Yeshua says, you are permitted to enter the congregation. Rabban Gamliel says, wait a minute, it says in the Bible that an Ammonite or a Moabite shall not enter into the assembly of the Lord. Right? We have this
verse. After he's converted, does that change his nationality?
No. Not according to biblical status. According to rabbinic status, we're about to find out, yes. Rabban Gamliel says, no, that doesn't change. You don't get to change who you are. It's all about who you're born as, right? I'm descended from Hillel. That's why I get to do what I do. You don't get to just be born and then all of a sudden come into, you're Ammon. That's who you are. That's your identity. That's the part of you I can see, is your lineage, right? Or your history. It doesn't matter who you are as a person or who you love, that's not what comes into play here. Rabbi Yeshua replied to Rabban Gamliel now. He says, do Ammon and Moab still reside in their original homes? Right? Are you telling me that we still have nations of Ammon and Moab? This is historically, Sancherib, king of Assyria, went up and mixed up all the nations. Right? And he says, I've removed all the boundaries of people, and I've robbed their treasures, and I brought down as one mighty from their inhabitants, whatever. So meaning, the people who used to live in... if we were to make this more like...
on the east side.
The people who lived on the east side, right, they're no longer that east side nation anymore. The ones who lived on the west side, doesn't matter, because when I took over, as Sancherib said, right, people mixed up, they intermingled, and just because this is the region of the country doesn't mean that everybody who's in California is actually a Californian. It doesn't mean that everybody who lives in New York is actually a New Yorker, because people from Chicago move there, people from Florida move there, and people from New York move out and they go to, Michigan or whatever, it's all around. And so the halachic principle that Rabbi Yeshua applies is whatever separates from a group is assumed to belong to the majority of the group. So since the majority of the group was not people from Ammon and Moab, there were many, many, many nations conquered here. So therefore, it's assumed that if one guy comes out of this group, that they're not actually the status of Ammon or Moab, which means they could marry into the nation. All right, that was the technical piece. Are we okay with that? Mm-hmm. Okay, Rabban Gamliel is going to put up one last fight, and he says, but has it not been said, but afterwards I will bring back the captivity of the children of Ammon, saith the Lord, so that they have already returned, meaning once Ammon, always Ammon. And Rabbi Yeshua says, has it not also been said that I will turn the captivity of my people Israel, and they have not yet returned? Right? So he says, but people from Israel also, this is the nationalities change and it evolves and all this. And so we're not relying on every single verse in that way for our modern practice. Immediately they permitted him to enter the congregation. Rabban Gamliel says, this being the case, Jeff, you want to do it for us?
This being the case, I will go and appease Rabbi Yoshua. When he reached his house, he saw that the walls were black.
Okay, remember we had this imagery before, the black and the white, again, so we're about to see it. Keep going.
He said to him, from the walls of your house, it is apparent that you are a charcoal burner.
Okay. What just happened here?
It's sort of like when he said, you're a ship... What he said when he was teaching on the ship.
Mm-hmm. What is he? Well, yeah, go ahead. Say more.
I forgot what he said there.
It's in part 2, or 2b, I think it is.
Why do you try to earn a living sailing on a boat? He's kind of putting him down. I shouldn't have opened my mouth.
No, this is good. He is putting him down a little bit, but also, what are we learning about? What are we seeing about Rabban Gamliel?
He's a little. Does he have contempt?
Is it contempt?
For the generation which you are a leader of, seeing that you know nothing of the troubles of God.
Well, just notice the phrase: "From the walls of your house, it is apparent that you are a charcoal burner."
So you don't have such a fancy abode. It's
Okay.
damaged by soot or
Okay, you've got black. Remember what? Oh, what's on the walls?
Charcoal.
Charcoal, right?
Yeah.
Which is our same thing that Rabban Gamliel had in his dream. Notice the parallel there, right?
He had the white
The white jar
Full
jar
of
with
full of
ashes.
ashes. Yeah.
right? So now he goes to Rabbi Yehoshua's house, right? And what does he see on the walls?
Ashes.
Ashes. Okay, but also, how does Rabban Gamliel know that Rabbi Yehoshua is a charcoal burner? Just read that sentence again. There's a huge clue in there from the right opening
walls.
clause. From the walls of your house, what does he say?
It is apparent.
It is apparent. How long have Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yehoshua been partners, been learning together?
He's never been to his house before.
He's never been to his house before. And not only that, he doesn't know anything else about him other than this Torah world, right? Only when he goes to the house does he say, "Oh, it looks like..." It'd be like if you come to my house and you see my Chicago sports paraphernalia, he's like, "Oh, you're a Bulls fan," right? Or, "Oh, you like the Blackhawks," right? I mean, that would... If you talk to me for 5 minutes, you'll know that if we talk about sports at all, you'll know that I like the Chicago sports teams. But if you don't take that time to meet me, you never know it. But the second he comes into his house, "Oh, I see you're a charcoal burner." Well, thanks, but I mean, why did it take you till now to be able to figure that out, right?
So he's not being contemptuous. He's just
it might
making
be.
an observation.
So you could read it just very neutral, that he's just making an observation. You could read a little condescension in there as well, right? But maybe this is Rabban Gamliel's aha moment, right? That he says, "Oh, I never realized how difficult it was for you. That you have to sail and go on all these trips, and you have to be a charcoal burner, and like maybe he's starting to figure it out." But what is Rabbi Yehoshua's response?
He replied, "Woe for the generation of which you are the leader, seeing that you know nothing of the trouble of the scholars, their struggles to support and sustain themselves." He said to him, "I apologize. Forgive me." He paid no attention to him.
So Rabbi Yehoshua paid no attention to Rabban Gamliel. So what does Rabban Gamliel do? He invokes the strongest
Lineage.
the strongest claim he can think of, which is...
"Do it," he said, "out of respect for my father."
Okay, and his father, in this case, could either be his direct father, Shimon ben Gamliel, or he could be referring to
Anyone up
Hillel, right? Like that, do it for my great-great-great-grandfather, but I'm calling him, my father, because that's who I'm descended from. And this, finally, to Rabbi Yehoshua is acceptable. So he forgives him. All right. Huge transitions, but we're like seeing the journey of Rabban Gamliel, and now they've forgiven each other. So now we got to go back to tell the rabbis that they're no longer fighting. So who's going to do it? Kathy, tell us.
They said, "Who will go and tell the rabbis?" A certain laundryman said to them, "I will go." Rabbi Yehoshua sent a message.
Hold on. Who says it to them?
The laundryman.
Can we read any significance about that?
He's low. He's not a scholar.
Okay,
He
great.
Washes their clothes.
Fantastic.
And
when do you have to wash clothes?
Friday.
Oh,
Before
I
Shabbos.
didn't think about that. I was thinking more like on a literal level. Like, at what point do you wash clothes?
When
This
they're
is like a
dirty.
purification kind of a
right.
thing.
For sure, we can see it sort of like when they get dirty. Well, who are the ones whose clothes get dirty?
The workers.
People who have to work.
Yeah.
Right? So this is like the perfect representative to tell them that, guess what? Rabban Gamliel gets us now, right? The union has spoken, or I don't know, I don't want to get into politics, but right? the laundryman says, I'm so excited. I get to pay attention. I get to be paid attention to all of a sudden, right? Rabbi Yoshua sends a message to the Beit Midrash saying,
Let him who is accustomed to wear the robe wear it. Shall he who is not accustomed to wear the robe say to him who is accustomed to wear it, take off your robe and I will put it on?
yeah, that's a really confusing sense of robes. So, but just look at the first phrase and then the rest of it makes sense from there. Let him who
Is accustomed to the robe wear it, so
Okay.
he can keep wearing.
So who is the one who is accustomed to wear the robe?
Gamliel.
Rabban Gamliel. So let he who is accustomed to wearing it, wear it. So who does Rabbi Yoshua actually, he advocates that,
We put Rabban Gamliel back.
yes,
in.
let's reinstate him. He is the official, correct, proper one to wear this robe. Right? Which is so fascinating when you think about all the hurt that went on with Rabbi Yoshua. He still recognized that Rabban Gamliel was the leader. Right?
I think it's really amazing that Gamliel stayed in the hall.
That he stayed in the Beit Midrash.
Yeah.
He knew nothing else.
Yeah, but he was deposed. You know, and the passage is so concerned about embarrassment.
Yeah. That what must it have been like for him to be in there?
Yeah, but it was, you know, he just
Yeah.
said, okay, you know, I'll just sit over here.
Right. But if you're somebody who's not used to connecting with people, so then you have your books. What more do you need?
Yeah, it doesn't relate to people even to get embarrassed.
Right.
About
Right. So it's his downfall, but it ends up being a coping mechanism for him a little bit too.
What does this imply that he hadn't taken off his robe yet? Because
Well, it's a
he's saying
metaphorical
that-
robe.
Okay,
Right,
because he
meaning-
says that somebody that doesn't wear one shouldn't say to him, "Take off your robe."
Right.
So was I really reading into this, the laundryman laundering the sin, if you will, of, pure, the dirt being kind of, the hate, if you will, of not.
Oh, interesting. Hold on. So, shall he who is not accustomed to wear the robe say to him who is accustomed to wear it, take off your robe and I will put it on? Meaning,
That should.
Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, right? Would he actually be able to say to Rabban Gamliel, I'm going to be the leader?
Well, I was even just saying something as simplistic as a laundryman infers laundering.
Yeah,
Washing
like
your
cleansing.
Yeah.
Well, we certainly need some cleansing at this story,
yeah.
right? There's been a lot of dirt imagery, a lot of pain, a lot of hurt, right? There certainly needs to be some sort of cleansing going on here, absolutely. Because otherwise, why would they just say they found a guy or a peasant or a worker? Like, the fact that we have his profession, I think, is absolutely meaningful. All right, so here's the conclusion. Rabbi Akiva said to the rabbis, lock the doors so that the servants of Rabban Gamliel should not come and upset the rabbis. Meaning now the rabbis have to figure out what to do. So don't let there be protesters outside. Like, lock the doors, let them think, and let them figure out how they're going to reinstate Rabban Gamliel. If Rabbi Yoshua is the one who was hurt, and he says it's okay for him to be the president again, we got to figure out what to do, because we've got this other guy who's currently acting as president. You okay, Kathy?
Well, now I've gotten to the sprinkler son of a sprinkler sprinkle.
Okay, right?
It's a little much on the alliteration.
Yeah, so here we go. Rabbi Yoshua said, I had better get up and go to them, right? I'll be the one to tell them. Let the sprinkler, son of a sprinkler, sprinkle. Meaning, the one whose job it is to do this knows how to do it best. I'm so used to appeasing Rabban Gamliel, let me go to the rabbis and they will hear that I am appeased, and I will take care of that piece. Shall he who is neither a sprinkler nor the son of a sprinkler say to a sprinkler, son of a sprinkler, your water is cave water and your ashes are oven ashes? We could try to dissect that. Really what it's saying is, should somebody who doesn't know what's going on talk to somebody who does know what's going on and say, your pants are on backwards? Right, that's okay. And by the way, the sprinkler here is also a reference to, if you want to talk about your purity, Jeff, anytime, the one time we used ashes, right, because Rabbi Yoshua was a charcoal burner, the one time we use ashes to purify is with the para aduma, where it's mixed with the water, right, and then that becomes the cleansing agent. right? So I think that's sort of his pun or his allusion there. Since I'm the charcoal burner, I have the ashes, so I will be the sprinkler. I'll sprinkle the ashes, as it were, on the situation to help clarify, purify, cleanse it, whatever. Now, Rabbi Akiva said to him, Bob, you want to do it?
Rabbi Yehoshua, you have received your apology. Yet, did we do anything except out of regard for your honor?
So what's the only reason that we went through all of this trouble of deposing Rabban Gamliel?
Kind of resolve the embarrassment issue that...
Because you got hurt. We respect you, and you were hurt here. That's why we went through all of this. So if you say that that it's forgiven...
It's good enough with us if it's good enough with you.
Okay, so tomorrow...
Tomorrow morning, you and I will wait on him.
Okay, we're going to wait on Rabban Gamliel to let him know that he can come back to the Beit Midrash as Nasi.
They said, how shall we do? Shall we depose him, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah?
Right, because we've got this other president who's currently serving. Do we just get rid of him now and say, oh, you were pro tempore, which, by the way, was exactly the first claim that his wife said is, what if they depose you? Right? Okay.
We have a rule that we may raise an object to a higher grade of sanctity, but must not degrade it to a lower.
Right. We always increase in holiness, we don't decrease. That's, by the way, why we light Hanukkah candles 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and not 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, which, if you think about it, the miracle makes more sense that there was 8 pieces of oil and then it was a little less, which would be 7, a little less, 6, 5, 4, 3, until the oil ran out. But we always increase in matters of holiness. Look at that, 2 fun trivia tidbits. Okay, keep going.
If we let one master preach on one Sabbath and one on the next, this will cause jealousy.
Right, so we can't divide a 4-week month into 2 and 2. That's going to make people jealous. So what do we do instead?
Let therefore Rabban Gamliel preach 3 Sabbaths and Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah 1 Sabbath.
Okay, so Rabban Gamliel gets to be reinstated, but not full time, just 75% of the time. And this other guy who was pro tempore or filling in as the interim, he still gets to maintain his post, but just for 1 week a month. Okay?
And it is in reference to this that a master said, whose Sabbath was it? It was the Sabbath of Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah. And that
okay, so no, don't give that away yet. Right, so other places in the Talmud, there's a discussion where it says, whose Sabbath was it? And if you don't have this story,
preaching.
You don't know what they really mean is, who's teaching that week? Right? So it was Elazar ben Azariah. Fine, that's what this means. Now, finally, we have the end of the story. Go ahead, Bob.
And that disciple was Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai.
What disciple? That's a really weird ending to the story, right? Go back to the beginning here.
Is he saying that's who was saying, let this happen?
Let's go back to the second paragraph and the very, the start of this Talmud section. You got to go back 2 pages. It is related that...
A certain disciple, so this is the guy.
This is the guy. Right? A certain disciple came before Rabbi Yehoshua and asked him, and then what did that disciple do after he got Rabbi Yehoshua's answer?
He got hot.
He got hot, and then he challenged right away to Rabban Gamliel. So who was that student who incited this riot in the Beit Midrash? Right?
Shimon bar Yochai.
Shimon bar Yochai, who, by the way, if all goes well, will be the next one that we learn about.
Can we go back just for a second?
Yes, sir.
And it is in the reference to this that a master said who Shabbat was, so that if there was a question about it, they would defer to Elazar ben Azariah. They would say, give him the kavod that it was his learning.
It was correct.
Okay.
And presumably that different masechtot were taught, or different pieces were taught on different weeks.
But we'll give him the credit for it when we're not sure who it was.
Well, so there's actually a specific case that they're talking about here. I don't remember exactly what it was.
He won't let you out?
No, we're done. We're just having fun with this part.
Okay, Bob, will you lock up?
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you.
So they I forgot what the case was that they were talking about, but they wanted to know who was the one who was leading at that time, and so they say it was his week for whatever learning to be going on, which also means it's a clarification of like which halacha to follow then. because it's his teaching, so therefore it was his week, so therefore it's his teaching.
Okay.
I don't know actually how they reconciled, like what if he and Gamliel disagreed about something? Does that mean that like 3 weeks out of the year, the Eruv is up, and 1 week or 3 weeks out of the month it's up, and 1 week it's down, or I don't know how they did that. But it's fascinating that really this whole point of the story, even though we were studying Rabban Gamliel, the punchline is that the student who started it all was Rashbi, Shimon Bar Yochai. And so it's fascinating to me that that's the conclusion that we're trying to get to. Obviously, we read through the story and we saw Rabban Gamliel and we saw his progression. But again, what does leadership mean, right? And so we started off by talking about how the leaders are different, and maybe because they're the role models, so they have to be they have to act in a particular way. We also said that sometimes it comes with a blurring of the public and the private spheres, that you don't get to necessarily have as much of a private life. But at the same time, the way Rabban Gamliel did it is he saw it as a position of authority, a position of power. The flip of that was he wasn't as in touch with his students, right, and his learners. And then when it really comes to bear is that he pushed too far and really just was so out of touch with his students that he embarrassed publicly. And I don't think he was even aware. Remember we said all those other 3 examples? I don't think he was aware that he was embarrassing Rabbi Yehoshua in those cases either. Right? Like, it's just, we got so fed up. He can't continue to treat us this way. He can't continue to embarrass people publicly. So we got to put a stop to it, depose him, the end. And that's sort of I went too far. And then only when he gets to Rabbi Yeshua's house, which, as you pointed out, is the first time he's ever been there, and they've been chavrutas for a while. They've been, right? This is years they've been learning together. Only then does he say, "Oh, and you're a charcoal burner. I never knew that about you," right? But it's this, in this quest for greatness and for advanced Torah study, he neglected the personal piece of it, which, again, they wouldn't reinstate him fully because this Elazar ben Azariah right away gets the personal piece. Mm-hmm. So we're going to keep him around as a reminder that every time Rabban Gamliel has a week off, that's your time to get in touch with the people, right? And I think that that's a really neat way of sort of putting it all together, that he had one lesson that he had to learn, and the rabbis were there to help him learn that lesson.
So did the Beit Midrash stay more open after this point?
Yeah, that's what
I believe so, because I don't hear any. I mean, I didn't know of anything coming back beyond that, but
Right.
But it seems to be. Yeah, I mean, it's a cool story. We use the other 2 to get there as well, but
Right.
when we think about who are our leaders, right, and what do we want from them, I think this is a very real issue that a lot of us think about, and we got elections coming up in a little while, and we say who are we going to vote for, and why are we picking the people that we're picking? And I'm trying to do this as non-political as possible, right? I'm framing the questions for us. You come up with your own answers, right? But there's a certain piece where our leader has to serve a particular role, and depending on the type of leader we're looking for, that leader will either fit that role or will be lacking in the characteristics necessary for that role. So thank you all for sharing your thoughts as well.
Yeah.
Great listening.
That was great.